The rain was relentless that night in Seoul. Inside the opulent golden glass Han Empire Hotel, an unnerving silence held sway. Everyone understood the unspoken rule. Never, under any circumstances, approach the boss's son. The boy, Juna, was a mere 5 years old. His once bright, star-like eyes were now clouded with fear, framed by his dark hair. Since the tragic loss of his mother, a genuine smile hadn't graced his face. No nurse could soothe him, no maid could bring him comfort. He would scream until his voice gave out, a heart-wrenching sound that his father, Kong Miho, the most formidable and feared man in all of Korea, was powerless to stop as he watched his son slowly retreat into a world of silence. Sarah, with her gentle demeanor and ever-present smile, quietly went about her work, wiping tables at the hotel cafe each morning. Her shoes were often damp, and her hands ached from constantly washing cups, yet she never complained. She had journeyed far from her small African hometown, chasing a dream that remained just out of reach. Her co-workers would whisper amongst themselves about her skin tone and her unfamiliar accent, but her heart remained open and kind. That particular afternoon, the sky unleashed its fury. A powerful storm was brewing. Inside the hotel, Miho was conducting a clandestine meeting in the private lounge. Men in impeccably tailored black suits, their eyes sharp and calculating, and their wrists adorned with expensive gold watches, filled the room. Sarah, her hands trembling slightly, was tasked with serving them tea. Everyone was intimidated by the Mafia boss. Fear was a constant companion in his presence. Suddenly, a small, heart-rending cry pierced the air. Appa! It was Juna, running down the hallway, tears streaming down his face. Guards frantically pursued him. The little boy stumbled into the cafe, his eyes wide with distress. Every waiter froze, paralyzed by fear. But Sarah, she couldn't simply stand by and do nothing. She slowly bent down, her voice as gentle as the falling rain. "You're safe here," she reassured him. The boy's sobs momentarily subsided. He looked at her, taking in her dark skin, her warm, compassionate eyes, and her calming smile. Something deep within him gave way. He ran directly into her outstretched arms, finding solace in her embrace, and then silence. Everyone in the cafe stared in disbelief. He buried his face in her neck, seeking comfort. The room became eerily still. Heavy footsteps echoed behind them. Kong Miho appeared, a towering figure dressed entirely in black. His eyes were as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm. "Who touched my son?" he growled, his voice laced with menace. The guards, trembling with fear, pointed towards Sarah. But when Miho saw his son asleep, finally at peace in the woman's arms, his anger seemed to dissipate. For the first time in years, a flicker of warmth touched his heart. He looked at Sarah. "Leave her," he commanded quietly. "She stays with him." The following morning, Sarah awoke in a mansion that she had previously only seen gracing the pages of glossy magazines. She was no longer a waitress. She was now the boy's caretaker. The guards kept a watchful eye on her every move, and the maids whispered behind her back, their words laced with suspicion. But Juna was smiling for the first time in what seemed like an eternity. He even fed her rice with tiny chopsticks, giggling with delight when she playfully pretended to miss her mouth. Every sound of his laughter reverberated through the cold, marble halls. And Miho, sitting in his office upstairs, would pause from signing papers, listening to the joyful sound, a faint smile gracing his lips. The mansion felt like a world unto itself, with its gleaming marble floors and elegant silver staircases. But to Sarah it felt more like a gilded cage. She was constantly under surveillance, every move she made scrutinized. Juna clung to her side like a shadow, refusing to eat unless she personally fed him, and refusing to sleep unless she gently hummed him to sleep. At first, the guards grumbled, one whispering that she was spoiling him. But Kong Miho silenced their complaints with a single, firm statement. "Let her do whatever keeps my son happy." It was the first time anyone had detected such tenderness in his voice. Every morning, Sarah would take Junna to the garden. He was particularly fond of the red flowers, explaining that they reminded him of the ribbons his mother used to wear. Sarah, unsure of what to say, would simply smile and gently respond, "Your mom must have been beautiful." "She was," Miho said from behind them, his voice startling her. He stood by the doorway, his hands casually in his pockets, his eyes intently fixed on his son. Sarah quickly bowed her head in respect. "Good morning, sir," she said. Miho simply nodded. His cold eyes softened momentarily. "You've done what no one else could," he acknowledged. Sarah looked confused. "You made him laugh." He then turned and left, leaving Sarah's heart racing. That evening, as the rain gently tapped against the windows, Junna ran into Miho's office, proudly carrying a drawing. He had drawn 3 simple stick figures, one tall, one small, and one with dark skin and curly hair. Miho frowned, puzzled. "Who's this?" Junna smiled shyly. "Appa, that's you. That's me, and that's Mama Sarah." Miho's chest tightened with emotion. For a moment, he didn't know whether to smile or cry. He looked into the boy's bright, happy eyes, a sight he hadn't witnessed since his wife's passing. He whispered softly, "Mama Sarah, huh?" Junna nodded proudly. Miho turned the paper over, his hand trembling slightly. That night, sleep eluded him. The next morning, trouble arrived in the form of a sleek black car that parked outside the mansion gates. From the car emerged a tall, elegant woman dressed in white. Her demeanor was cold and powerful. This was Madame, Miho's older sister, and the second most feared individual in their world. She entered the mansion without knocking, her eyes immediately settling on Sarah, who was helping Junna button his tiny jacket. "And who is this?" Madame inquired, her voice as sharp as shattered glass. Miho walked in. "She's my son's caretaker." "Caretaker?" Madame scoffed. "She's a waitress, brother. Do you have any idea what people are saying? The boss's son is obsessively attached to a foreign maid. You're losing respect." Miho's jaw clenched. Sarah remained silent, bowing her head respectfully. But Junna ran to her and hugged her leg tightly. "Don't talk to Mama like that," he cried. The entire room froze. Madame turned pale. Miho looked at Sarah. Their eyes met. For the first time, he didn't care about the opinions of the outside world. That night, Sarah sat by Junna's bed, humming softly. When he finally drifted off to sleep, she turned to leave, but Miho was standing in the doorway. He had been watching them the entire time. "She shouldn't have spoken to you that way," he said. Sarah shook her head. "It's fine, sir. I understand." He stepped closer. "No," he said softly. "You don't. In my world, kindness is seen as a weakness, but you make it look strong." Sarah was speechless, her heart pounding in her chest. He looked at Junna, sleeping peacefully. "You've done more for him than I ever could," he admitted. He paused. "Thank you, Sarah." When he left, Sarah sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. Tears she couldn't fully explain. For the first time since arriving in Seoul, she didn't feel quite so alone. The next few days were peaceful. Junna laughed more freely, Miho smiled more often, and Sarah began to feel safe, almost like she belonged. But in a house governed by shadows, peace was always fleeting. One night, while Sarah was tidying up Junna's playroom, she sensed something unsettling. A light flickered outside the window. Someone was watching. She froze. A man wearing a black helmet stood near the fence, his eyes concealed. Then, as if sensing her fear, he vanished into the darkness. The next morning, she reported the incident to one of the guards. He simply shrugged it off. "Probably paparazzi." "Don't worry," he said dismissively. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something ominous was approaching. Later that week, Miho came home early. Junna ran to him, giggling with excitement. "Appa, we made cookies." The sweet aroma of butter filled the air. Miho looked at Sarah, who smiled shyly, a dusting of flour on her cheeks. He had encountered countless women, elegant, wealthy, and confident, but none had ever exuded the warmth she possessed in that moment. Juna grabbed his father's hand. Appa, Mama Sarah's cookie. Miho took a bite. He nodded slowly. It's good. Sarah laughed softly. Only good. He smiled faintly. I don't use big words. But yes, it's very good. For the first time, Sarah saw something rare in his eyes. Peace. That night, Miho convened a private meeting in his study. His men gathered around him. There's been movement from the black serpents, he announced. They're getting too close to my territory. Sarah quietly passed by the door with a tray of tea. She didn't intend to eavesdrop, but she overheard something that sent a shiver down her spine. They're watching the house. Her mind flashed back to the man outside the window. It wasn't her imagination. Miho caught her eye through the partially open door. He frowned. Sarah, come in, he requested. She hesitated, then stepped inside. Did you see something? He asked. She told him about the man she had seen by the fence. Miho's eyes darkened. You should have told me earlier. His voice wasn't angry, but rather laced with fear. He immediately summoned his guards. Double the patrol. Nobody touches my son. Nobody touches her. The following morning, Sarah discovered a single white flower on her bed. There was no note, no explanation. But in Korea, she had learned that a white flower wasn't a gift. It was a warning. She rushed to Miho's office. Sir, I found this, she said, holding out the flower. He stared at it for a long moment, his hand clenching around it. They're sending a message, he said grimly. Who are they? She asked. He looked up slowly. People who want to hurt me. And now you. Sarah felt her chest tighten. I didn't ask for this, she whispered. I know, he said softly. But now you're part of my family, whether you want to be or not. Those words resonated with her throughout the day. That evening, thunder once again rumbled over Seoul. Juna sat by the piano, playing a simple tune that Sarah had taught him. Miho stood beside the window, his hand resting on his chin. Sarah, he said quietly, I used to think happiness was a weakness, that love only got you killed. She looked at him, unsure of how to respond. But every time you walk into a room, he continued, my son smiles, and I forget how to be cold. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to say something, but her throat felt tight. Before she could speak, the lights flickered and then went out completely. Juna screamed. A loud crash came from outside. Miho grabbed Sarah's hand. Stay with him, he ordered. Then he ran towards the sound, disappearing into the darkness. Sarah hugged Juna tightly as thunder echoed through the mansion. She whispered, It's okay, baby. You're safe. Mama's here. But in her heart, she wasn't so sure anymore. The power remained out for 10 agonizing minutes. The entire mansion was engulfed in darkness. Outside, heavy rain pounded against the windows like stones. Sarah sat on the floor, holding Juna close. Don't cry, she whispered softly. It's just thunder. But her own voice trembled. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on. Guards rushed through the hallways, shouting in Korean. Miho came running in, his face pale but determined. It was an intruder, he said. He didn't get far. Sarah's hands tightened around Juna. Was he here for him? Miho looked away. Maybe not this time, but the truth in his eyes suggested otherwise. He knelt beside her and placed a hand on Juna's shoulder. You're safe now, both of you. Then he looked at Sarah. From now on, you don't leave this house without a guard. Sarah nodded slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. The next day, Miho called in one of his most trusted men, Dejin. Tall, calm, and fiercely loyal, he was assigned to protect Sarah and Juna. At first, Sarah felt awkward having a guard constantly nearby. But Juna loved Dean's funny faces and his stories about his time as a soldier. Sometimes, even Miho would watch from a distance, quietly smiling. For a while, things felt normal, almost like a real family. Sarah cooked breakfast, Juna ran around the house, and Miho joined them at the table more often. He didn't say much, but when he did, his words carried weight. You have a strong heart, Sarah, he told her one morning. You're not afraid of me. Sarah smiled faintly. Should I be? He looked at her, really looked at her. No, he said softly. Not you. One afternoon, Juna developed a fever. Sarah stayed by his side all night, applying cool towels to his forehead and humming softly. Miho entered the room quietly at midnight. He saw her half asleep, still holding the boy's hand. He gently covered her with a blanket. Then he sat beside them, watching his son's chest rise and fall. Hours passed. Juna finally opened his eyes and whispered, Appa. Miho's heart swelled with relief. I'm here, son, he reassured him. Then Juna turned his head towards Sarah. Don't let Mama Sarah go, Appa, he pleaded. She makes the bad dreams stop. Miho swallowed hard. He looked at Sarah, asleep and peaceful, and realized the boy was right. She didn't just calm his son. She healed him. The following week, the mansion became quiet again. Too quiet. Guards reported seeing strange cars parked near the hills. Miho ordered increased security. But that didn't stop the letters. Every day, a new envelope arrived. There was no name, just 3 words written in red ink. She will pay. Miho burned every letter before Sarah could see them. But one morning, Juna discovered one and brought it to her. Look, Mama Sarah. Someone sent you a note. Sarah opened it. Her hands went cold. She ran directly to Miho's office. Why didn't you tell me? She cried. He stood up, his eyes filled with regret. Because I didn't want you to be afraid. I already am, she whispered. But not for me, for him. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. That night, sleep eluded Sarah. She quietly walked to the garden, breathing in the cool night air. There she saw him, Miho, standing beneath the cherry blossom tree, gazing at the sky. Couldn't sleep? He asked without turning around. She shook her head. You too. He smiled faintly. Men like me don't sleep easy. Sarah stepped closer. You're not a bad man, Miho. You're just hurt. He looked at her, a penetrating gaze. Really? Nobody talks to me like that. Then maybe nobody's been brave enough, she said softly. For a long moment, they simply stood there, the wind whispering through the trees. He took a slow breath and said, If anything happens to me, promise you'll protect Juna. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. Don't say that. I need to, he said. Because in this world, love is dangerous, and I think I'm starting to feel it again. Sarah's heart stopped. The night suddenly felt warmer. The threats continued to escalate. Cars followed them. Unknown numbers called and hung up. Even the guards grew restless. Miho tightened security. Sarah never let Juna out of her sight. But fear permeated every corner of the mansion. Late one night, Miho summoned Sarah to his office. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. I can't promise your safety anymore, he confessed. They want to hurt me, and now you're part of my weakness. Sarah shook her head. I don't need promises. I just need you to fight for your son. For the first time, Miho smiled weakly. You sound like my wife. She always said the same thing. The next day, they planned to move Juna to a safe house outside Seoul. But halfway there, their convoy came to an abrupt stop. Roadblock, empty street, silence everywhere. Stay inside, Miho ordered. Sarah hugged Juna tightly. From the windows, she could see shadows moving between the cars. Every second felt like an eternity. Suddenly, a flash of light, followed by chaos. Smoke filled the road. Guards shouted. Miho rushed back into the vehicle, breathless. They're here. Hold him. Sarah clutched Juna against her chest. I won't let go, she said, trembling. The car lurched forward. Screams, tires screeching, then silence again. When the air cleared, Miho was on the ground outside, barely conscious. Sarah jumped out, calling his name. Miho, she cried. He opened his eyes slowly, reaching for her hand. Sarah, is he safe? Yes, she sobbed. He's safe. He smiled faintly. Good. That's all that matters. She pressed her hands against his shoulders, her tears falling on his face. Don't you dare give up now, she pleaded. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. I wanted to tell you before. You came into our lives like sunlight through a locked door. I thought I'd forgotten how to feel. She shook her head, crying harder. Don't talk like this. You'll be okay. He smiled again. If I could live again, Sarah, I'd find you sooner. Then his eyes closed. Days passed in silence. The mansion was filled with guards, doctors, and hushed whispers. Sarah never left the small room adjacent to his. She watched over Junna, who refused to eat until he saw his father. When the doctors finally emerged with tired smiles, Sarah's knees buckled. He's alive, one said. He's weak, but he'll recover. Sarah covered her face, weeping with relief. Junna ran into her arms, shouting, Appa is okay. Miho's men bowed their heads. Even the walls seemed to breathe again. When Miho finally awoke, Sarah was there. She held his hand gently. You scared us, she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment. I meant what I said, he murmured. Even in the dark, I saw your face. You kept me alive. She smiled through her tears. And you kept us safe. He lifted her hand weakly. Maybe danger will never leave us, he said. But love can make even men like me brave. Sarah rested her head beside him. For the first time, the mansion felt warm again. One evening, they sat on the balcony. Junna ran around, chasing fireflies, his laughter echoing through the air. Miho turned to her. I don't want to go back to that life, he said quietly. All I want now is peace. Maybe a new beginning. Sarah's heart fluttered. And what does that beginning look like? He smiled faintly. It looks a lot like this. You and Junna. Months later, Junna's wish finally came true. Not through grand gestures, but through mornings filled with laughter, Sarah's cooking, and Miho learning to live without fear. At night, Sarah would read bedtime stories, while Miho would sit quietly by the door, listening. Sometimes Junna would call out, Daddy, come tuck me in, and Miho would smile. The same man who once feared love now found his home in it. The morning sun peeked through the white curtains. Sarah was in the kitchen, humming softly as she flipped pancakes. Junna sat on the counter, swinging his legs and giggling each time she made a funny face. When Miho walked in, his steps were quiet, but his heart felt full. Months ago, this house was filled with silence and shadows. Now it was filled with warmth, the sound of laughter, the smell of breakfast, and the peace of love. He leaned against the doorway and said softly, This is what happiness looks like. Sarah turned, smiling. Took you long enough to see it. They laughed together, and in that moment, everything painful felt far behind them. That evening, after Junna had fallen asleep, Miho called Sarah to the garden. The moonlight shimmered on the koi pond, and soft petals floated on the surface. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small silver box. Inside was a simple ring. No diamonds, no gold, just silver, clean and pure. It's not about wealth, he said quietly. It's about meaning. When I was at my lowest, you didn't walk away. You gave me light. Tears filled her eyes. You don't have to, she whispered. I already did, he said. Sarah, you didn't just calm my son. You healed us both. He slipped the ring gently onto her finger. Weeks later, the Han Empire Hotel glittered with lights once again. This time, not for a Mafia meeting, but for Junna's 6th birthday. Every guest anticipated an ordinary party, but something unexpected happened. As Junna blew out his candles, he looked up and shouted, Daddy, can she be my mommy now? The room went silent. Miho smiled, walked over, and took Sarah's hand. She already is, he declared. The guests applauded. Even his bodyguards smiled. But the most beautiful sound came from Junna's laughter as he hugged them both tightly. Months later, Sarah opened her own cafe, Mama's Brew. It became a small, peaceful haven where people came for coffee, warmth, and stories. Sometimes Miho would stop by with Junna, pretending to be a regular customer. When people asked who they were, Sarah would smile and say, My favorite troublemakers. Miho would chuckle. take her hand, and whisper, "Trouble never felt this good." Years later, on a spring morning, Juna drew a picture for school. A man, a woman, and a boy, all smiling under a big red heart. When the teacher asked who they were, he said proudly, "That's my family. My mommy, my daddy, and me." And miles away, Sarah and Miho sat together, watching the cherry blossoms fall. He wrapped an arm around her shoulder and said softly, "Sometimes the greatest miracles don't happen in power or wealth. They happen when two broken hearts find their way back to love." Sarah smiled, resting her head on his chest. In the quiet wind, his heartbeat was strong, steady, alive, and at peace. Finally, they were home,